Hello, everyone. Uh, Today, I would like to talk about one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, Joshua chapter 2. I don't know if you've paid attention to that chapter, if you've ever thought about it, but it's a wonderful, wonderful chapter. It takes place, of course, right at the beginning of Joshua assuming leadership over the nation of Israel, and just before their entry into the land of Israel. It's a chapter that begins with the sending of the two spies into the land of Israel. Joshua sends these two spies to scout out the land and come back with a report that will give him important intelligence that he will need in order to prepare the entry and the conquest of the land of Israel by the children of Israel. Now, of course, we remember that back in the book of Numbers, there is also a story of spies that Moses sent ahead into the land. And actually, if you think about it, the point at which Moses was sending these spies into the land, he too believed that he was right there on the verge of that new adventure about to enter the land of Israel. And it is only as a result of the tremendous failure of that first spy expedition, when 10 of the 12 spies return from Israel reporting that the land is terrible and it is full of giants and it is very scary and there's no way that they will succeed in conquering it. And it's only as a result of that tremendous display of lack of faith in God, lack of willingness to follow his word, that of course God punishes the nation of Israel, and an entire generation will end up dying in the desert, and only the next generation will end up going into the land. However, even though both Moses and Joshua start this mission with a supposedly similar objective to scout out the land for an immediate entry, from the beginning you can see there are obvious differences. Moses, first of all, the language that is used in Numbers talks about going to, the Hebrew word is latur. In fact, it is the root of the word for touring in Israel. The text does not at all use the word spy. Also in Numbers, we have that the people who are sent are very important people. They are the princes or the heads of each tribe, and these are the people that are sent. So both of those put together, the fact that the word spy is not used in the book of Numbers, and the fact that the people that are sent are very well-known leadership people, would lend us to believe that Moses' mission was not an undercover mission. If he were really looking for secret intelligence to help him figure out how to make his battle plans or whatever, we would have had a whole different type of thing. Joshua, on the other hand, is typically a reconnaissance mission. He is sending two people whose names we never know. We have no idea who they are, and he sends them. So the fact that we don't know their names means that they're very anonymous kind of people. And actually, if you think about spies, spies usually are names we don't know. These are people who actually we may know them, because you never know if there is a spy in your midst, as many who are more paranoid might say. But in reality, spies by definition are not known. They may be known under a completely different identity, but they're certainly not known as spies. That's part of their tradecraft. And so very much the description that we have here in chapter 2 in Joshua fits that picture of sending only two people, very anonymous people, undercover, to really figure out, the lay of the land. Okay, so let's begin with the description. Okay, so, and Joshua the son of Nun, sent from the Shittim. The Shittim is a name of a place. Actually, Shittim also refers to reeds or to certain kinds of bush growing up in the desert. a certain, excuse me, not reeds, it's a certain kind of a tree or bush in the desert. We'll go back to the meaning of that in a minute. And he sends two people, spies, secret spies. This is what the Bible tells us. And he says, go look at the land and Jericho. And that's it. That's their mission. Check out Jericho. So again, they're not traveling through the entire land. They are going to a place just across where they are now. They are now, the children of Israel, sitting in the plains of Moab, and they're on the eastern edge of the Jordan River. And when they cross the Jordan River, the first city they're going to meet in the land of Israel is Jericho. And that's really all Joshua wants them to do. He wants them just to scout out that one city, and that's what they do. Okay, I'd like to go back, though, to the use of the word Shittim. Shittim is actually a place in the plains of Moab, and we know, for example, in Numbers 33, verse 49, in the context of describing the various travels of the various camps and the various travels of the nation of Israel as they move from Egypt to as they are about to enter the land of Israel, one of the last places they end up in a place called Shittim, which is in the plains of Moab. So from a physical perspective, there's no question that this refers to just some place where they're camping, just as they're about to go into the land of Israel. But I think the use of the word Shittim, very specifically, it doesn't say the plains of Moab. It says Shittim. What the immediate connotation with this is a story that we read about in Numbers 25. Okay, Numbers 25 is a terrible, terrible story. It's a story about how the women of Moab and Midian seduce some of the men of Israel, and as part of that seduction, they are also bringing them to worship Baal Peor, which is a pagan god that reigns over many of the countries to the east of the Jordan. And this is where it took place. And Numbers 25 begins with the following verse, and Israel settled in Shittim. And there the nation began to commit sexual adultery and crimes with the daughters of Moab. So to me, when I read this here in Joshua 2, that Joshua is sending these spies from the Shittim, and it immediately refers me back to that terrible time, which is actually just a few weeks earlier, a terrible time that ends up in great destruction and a great plague that comes upon those people from within the nation of Israel who sinned in this way. To me, this tells us that we're going back to square one. But we're getting a fresh start. And I think this is such a beautiful thing. There's no question the book of Joshua in general is a wonderful book. It is a time of new beginnings. It's a time of promise. The whole entry into the land of Israel goes forward with very little problems. Many miracles accompany them. But as we open the book of Joshua, the nation is about to enter the land of Israel. So all of the opportunities and promises are before them. And by saying here that by the symbolism of this, of Joshua sending the spies to start this whole process of entering the land, the fact that it's starting from that very same place, where just a few weeks earlier they were sunk in some of the worst sin and punishment, it says a lot to me about the power of repentance and the power of change, because clearly that episode is over. We are now starting fresh and entering into the land of Israel, and yet we're coming from the very same place. We're not forgetting that ever happened, but we're saying, okay, we dealt with that. The people who needed to be punished have punished. The nation has learned their lesson, and we are starting fresh. What an amazing lesson, I think, for all of us when we think about how God gives us the opportunity over and over again to refresh, to repent, and to start fresh. So here we are starting fresh. Okay, now I want to go really into the story, because the main part of the story here in Joshua 2, of course, is the encounter of these two spies with Rahab. Rahab is a woman. We find out about her, and this is also very interesting. If we refer to the fact that Shittim refers to that last time where the nation of Israel sinned with prostitution and adultery in a major way, tied up with pagan worship to Baal Peor. Here we have these two people coming and meeting a woman, Rahab, who herself not only is a prostitute, but seems to run a house of prostitution. So on the one hand, we are introduced to a woman who is not, shall we say, in the most honorable profession, or certainly not someone with the finest reputation. And yet, as we see, as this story moves forward, she ends up shining in every way possible. So I think that's also the language and the information here. By throwing us back to that terrible Baal Peor again, we have a message of change and redemption. Rahab herself is in a place that would have put her in sin and in a terrible situation, and yet she herself finds a whole new way of looking at life and repents in one of the most amazing ways, and really starts fresh in a very, very special way. Anyway, these two people come, and they come to her initially. Her house is in the gates, in the wall of the city of Jericho. And that we had talked about in the past how if somebody sits in the gates of the city, this is very often the commercial center. But when you have a house of prostitution in the wall of the city, it also is a place of where people who don't want to be seen going to places of ill repute. It's not going to be in the center of the town. It's going to be near the entrance or exit of the town so people can easily slip in and slip out after dark. And so they come in, and they need to be hidden, and she, of course, assists them. And when they first come into her house, they have no idea. She has no idea who they are, and they don't tell her. And then there are these people from the king. The king hears, of course, that some people have come, and he suspects that maybe they're hiding with her. And indeed, she has hidden them, and she hides them and lies to the king, and lies to the king's men, and said, no, they went that way instead of somewhere else. And then she goes up to the people, to these two men, Rahab, and we're now in verse 9. She goes up to these two men, and she's going to help them escape. She's going to tell them also why she is doing what she's doing. And here perhaps is one of the most significant passages and why I love this chapter so much. So we'll start with verse 10. She says to the men, I know that God has given you this land, and that trembling of you, fear of you, has fallen upon us, and all the residents of this land melt before you. Now, and she goes on, she says, and we've heard how God dried up the Red Sea before you as you were leaving Egypt, and all that he did and all that you have done to the two kings of the Amorites on the other side of the Jordan, to Sihon and to Og, which you have destroyed. And we have heard, and our hearts have melted, and there is no longer a spirit in anyone here to stand before you, because the Lord is your God. He is the God of the heavens above and of the earth below. This is one of the most amazing speeches or declarations that you will hear in the Bible. And it is said by a woman who is, as I said, she is not coming from any high level of society. She's actually at the dregs of society. And it is not referring to any special messages that someone has given her. She is not a prophet. She has not been taught anything. What she has is a clear sense of vision and understanding. She is saying to these people, we have all heard of the miracles of the parting of the Red Sea. We have heard of all the victories and miracles that have happened to you as you left Egypt and as you were in the desert. We've heard it all, and it has made us fearful, and it has helped us recognize that your God is indeed the God of the heavens and the earth. And therefore, what she is saying to these two men is that her motivation to help them and to literally switch sides from standing with her own king and her own countrymen to move sides to help these men who are from Israel. Her motivation is her belief in God, which is amazing. This is a woman who has undergone a complete transformation because she has paid attention to what God is doing to the nation of Israel. Now, one of the things that is so fascinating about this is the actual words and language that is used as she says her speech. Now, and this is, by the way, something that if you are not reading it in the original Hebrew, you may not be sensitive to this, because unfortunately in many English translations, I notice that they translate the same word here in a different way that they're going to translate it in Exodus. And what I'd like to do now is read you a little bit from Exodus 15, which is Moses' Song of the Sea, his amazing Thanksgiving poem that he recites with the nation of Israel just after the parting of the Red Sea. And of course, it's a beautiful poem. It talks about the wonders and the greatness of God. But in verses 14, 15, and 16, this is Exodus 16, verses 14, 15, and 16, Moses focuses on the effect of these miracles on the nations around them, including the nations in Canaan, how they have responded or will be responding to this amazing miracle. And so this is what we read. The nations have already heard and shivered. Travailing fear has already seized the inhabitants of Philistine. But now the leaders of Edom's army are disconcerted. Trembling seizes the powerful ones of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan are completely broken up. Now, that's the translation here that I want to point out. This is not such a good word. All the inhabitants of Canaan have completely melted. The word here in Hebrew is namogu, melt away, crumble away. It is an expression of fear. Picture the kind of fear that you feel like it just disintegrates you. The fear is so powerful that it melts you, takes you apart, disintegrates you. That's what namogu is. And it is exactly the same word that we read here in chapter 2 in Joshua, where she says in verse 9, trembling of you has fallen upon us, and using the same word, ematchem, and we see this, you're trembling, we saw that here as well in verse 16, fear and dread, or fear and trembling, fall upon you. Okay, it's exactly the same words. And then we continue in verse 9 in Joshua 2, and all the residents of this land have melted or fallen apart before you. And this is exactly the same word, namogu, which is actually a very unique word. It's almost never used in the Bible. We have this at the end of verse 15 in Exodus 15, where Moses says all the residents of Canaan are melting or falling apart as a result of this. So we have very, very clear echoes in Rahab's speech to the Song of Moses. And I think this is very much done on purpose. I think this is a way that God is pointing out to us that what Moses prophesied, standing there at the Red Sea, that this is what is going to happen, or he already sensed it was happening, but he wasn't able to know it in a physical way because he's not standing in Canaan, he's not standing in Philistine, he's not standing in Edom. He is standing at the edges of the Red Sea, having just witnessed the parting of the Red Sea, and yet he is talking about the effects that this amazing miracle of the Exodus from Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea, the effects that this miracle is having on all these nations surrounding Israel. And here we have Rahab attesting to that. In reality, yes, just like Moses predicted or said would be happening, it has actually happened. Now, unfortunately, she talks about a lot of people. She says, all the nations of Canaan, but it clearly does not apply to the kings. And this is something, of course, that we can see very often. I think Rahab here represents the ordinary people. she's an unusual ordinary person because she's an ordinary person who is willing to act and take a stand based upon what she sees. But she is referring to the fact that all over the land, people have been struck in awe and fear and trembling over what God did to the nation of Israel. If that were the case, there would be nobody for Joshua and the nation of Israel to fight against, because as they walked in, the whole nation would just collapse and say, well, it's yours, take it. But of course, that's not what's happening. And we do know that Joshua has wars, but who is he fighting against? He's fighting against the kings. He's fighting against the governments and their armies. But what this statement tells these two spies and what they are able to bring back to Joshua is that they do not have the whole nation behind them. They have the official structures, they have their armies, they have the kings, and the kings, of course, with their pride and their arrogance, are never going to admit that there's another power out there, God of Israel, the God of heaven and earth, who could possibly be stronger than them and their gods. So here we have really a contrast between what people who do not have ego involved, how they would respond, and how the kings are going to respond. Rahab, of course, takes us much, much further, and she pledges to help them, to these two men, and indeed helps them leave, tells them where to go. They go actually west, up into the hills just above Jericho, which, by the way, are the hills of Samaria, very close to where I live. They go up there and they wait there for 3 days because the king's men are looking for them, as they're assuming they would have already gone east and crossed back over the Jordan River to the camp where the children of Israel are camping. So they go up to the west into the hills, wait 3 days, and then come back down after the king's men have given up looking for them. And in that way, they're able to cross back over the river and be safe. So when they come back, when the two men come back to Joshua, there's just one verse, very short. We have that whole speech of Rahab. We have a whole experience that these men have with the king's men, etc. But when they come back to Joshua, they say a very simple sentence. They said, and this is verse 24, the very last verse of chapter 2. And they said to Joshua, because God has given the entire land in our hands, and all the dwellers of the land have melted before us. Again, that same word, namogu. We see that word 3 times in the Song of Moses at the beginning, in the middle of chapter 2, when Rahab uses that word to describe the effects of the parting of the Red Sea on the people of Canaan. And again at the end, this is the one summary, the essence of what Rahab says is what the two men choose to tell Joshua. This is what it's all about, the effects of the miracles that God has wrought to the nation of Israel and how they've affected the nations in the land of Canaan. Now, what happens afterwards? After at the end of the story, of course, Joshua comes in and he conquers the land, and they're successful, and they conquer Jericho. Let's just talk about Jericho now. And at the end, they do come and rescue Rahab and her family. She has made sure, as the two men insisted, that the family is in the house and they stay close in the house. So the people of her family who need to be rescued are all together in this one house. And this is in chapter 6, Joshua chapter 6, verse 23. And these two young men, the spies, come and they take out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and everything of hers and all her family. They take them out. And then it says, and they place them outside the camp of Israel. Now, as they bring them back to Israel, they save them from the destruction that the rest of Jericho will experience, but they place them outside the camp. Why? I guess they're not sure what to do with them. What is their status going to be? We have now saved them, but they're not part of Israel. Are they? Or are they? Just 2 verses later, in verse 25, we have the following. And Rahab the prostitute and her father's house and all that she has, Joshua kept alive. And she dwelled within Israel until this very day. Clearly, something happened in between the previous verse where she is outside the camp and here where she dwells within the nation of Israel. Clearly, she has made her choice, and not only has she done her part to save, all she had done was save these spies and asked in return to be saved, then she would have stayed outside the camp of Israel. She was saved, but she's not part of Israel. But clearly, she makes it clear that she really and truly believes that statement that she had originally made. Yes, she believes that the God of Israel is the God of heaven and earth, and he is the one who is in charge. And she makes that statement. She is coming to this not from a place of, I just want to be saved, so I'm going to save you. She's coming to this from a place of, I recognize God, and I want to be part of that nation of Israel, who God is doing these wonderful things for. And so therefore we see, Scripture tells us, she becomes part of the nation of Israel. Jewish tradition takes this even further. Jewish tradition says that Joshua actually married Rahab. And there's a tradition that talks about some of the many descendants of that marriage, one of whom is Jeremiah. So this is a story about a woman, not a fancy woman, not an important woman, in fact, quite the opposite, a woman from the very bottom of society. But because she has eyes to see and ears to hear, and she is able to look at the world and to the universe and see what God is doing, that brings her to trust God and want to stand with God's people and become part of them and together worship God of Israel. It's an amazing story that I think every one of us can find inspiration in. She's an amazing woman, Rahab. Wonderful being with you today. Keep cheer, keep smiling, and keep healthy. Thank you.